All right, well, we can get going. I don't know if Melanie Loizem was able to join us, Acting Deputy Commissioner of DEP, but my name is Hannah Pingree, and I am the co-chair of the Maine Climate Council, and you are here joining us for an optional webinar on Maine's in the works Clean Energy Economy Plan, which my office has been working on really with the Governor's Energy Office in the lead. And I'm gonna let Director Dan Burgess and staffer Melissa Winnie, who has really done yeoman's work on this report, walk you through it. So just for quick context, the Clean Energy Economy report was part of the original legislation that enacted the Maine Climate Council and put the new targets into law, passed in 2019. I think the governor felt strongly, as did many members of the Maine legislature, that as we make transitions to a lower emissions economy, that we have an incredible opportunity in Maine to build a stronger clean energy economy to create jobs in a variety of sectors, from efficiency to renewable energy to emerging wood product sectors. So I think that this work, especially in the context of a recession, a challenging economic time, is all the more important. So I think we are already seeing some exciting growth in this sector in Maine based on some of the policies, again, enacted by the Maine legislature, supported by many of you on this Zoom screen. So I think this report is going to both take us through sort of where we are and how we got here, but also the opportunities for the future. The report is still in the works. We expect it to be finally released by the end of the week. We've gotten some really helpful feedback from stakeholders, from clean energy companies, from varying industry members, which Melissa will talk about. So we anticipate it being released by the end of the week. So there's some specific details being added. I think some exciting metrics that we are finalizing about where we want to go in the creation of clean energy jobs. So we will make sure that the Maine Climate Council sees that final report, as well as I know there are a number of Economic Recovery Committee members who are joining us today. You will all be the first to get it, but it will certainly be open to the public as well. So with that, I'm gonna pass it off to Director Dan Burgess, who has really led the charge on a lot of this work. I will say to the Maine Climate Council members, you received a draft yesterday. Sort of, we are in the ongoing iterative process of updating the framework for the climate action plan. The plan you received yesterday sort of has the start of additional goal around creating good paying jobs in Maine, especially in the clean energy sector, but also in natural resource sectors that need to be protected based on climate challenges. So that new goal is in there. The whole idea of this report is to inform the Maine climate four-year climate action plan. So we are sort of, our role as the Maine Climate Council is to hear this presentation today, to read the final report, but then to set goals on the jobs front and the clean energy front as a part of our climate action planning. So that's sort of where we are in the process. So Dan and Melissa will take you through a presentation. We'll have time for a couple reactions and questions, but we do hope to finish right at 10 o'clock, because I know this is another meeting. We have a big meeting tomorrow, so we want to be respectful of folks' time. So I will pass it off to Dan. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Hannah. And yeah, thank you all for joining. Cassie, are you able to share your screen of the slides? Thanks. So as Hannah mentioned, this is going to be an overview of the soon-to-be forthcoming report around the clean energy economy as required by the Climate Council statute. If you go to the next slide, just as a reminder about what's required. So the Climate Council legislation requires a clean energy economy transition plan to go along with the updated climate plan. And A, B, and C on this in this highlight a few things that are required to be included. One is just overall opportunities to advance and ways to address barriers to advancing the state's clean energy economy. The second is for a focus on rural communities, workers, and businesses. as that are transitioned and to encourage good paying jobs and long-term employment. And the third is really about identifying a whole host of opportunities, from policy recommendations to public-private partnerships, workforce development. You can see the list there. So what we're going to go through today and publish soon aims to hit each of those requirements in the legislation. Next slide. So I think, this is obviously a Climate Council meeting, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on obviously the goals of the Climate Council, but knowing that the ERC is members of the public might be on, I want to spend kind of this introductory time as a kind of an overview of both, the kind of the work that's happening, and the Climate Council very, very light on that, but really setting the stage for kind of what's happening in the energy space already in Maine. And so I'm going to go through a few slides of kind of some of the developments happening in the state right now, and then we'll turn it over to Melissa to talk through some of the specific employment numbers that we wanted to share with you. So, this group and others know that the Climate Council is tasked with the Climate Action Plan, 45% below of emissions reductions below 1990, 80% by 2050. The first by 2030, second by 2050. I think also clearly a big emphasis is during this transition, how do we make sure that the clean energy economy creates new jobs and can be positive for the state's economy. And so that's the goal of the Climate Council, but specifically of this report. Next slide. So just as I think, obviously this group knows that the majority of our emissions come from transportation, followed by buildings, and then the industrial sector. So what I'm going to do is just kind of give a very brief overview of some actions that are already happening in each of these or at least the buildings and transportation and electric power to reduce emissions, and some of the economic results and opportunities that we're seeing from that. So next slide. So I'm going to focus on the heating and transportation sector activities, and then two components of recently passed legislation. The first is the changes to the renewable portfolio standard. Next is a focus on distributed generation and the outcomes from those activities, and then again heating and transportation sectors activities that are happening there. Next slide. So assuming folks are aware of this, but just as an overview, as we look to lower carbon emissions coming out of the heating and transportation sector, there are a number of activities happening now across the state, in large part thanks to our partners at Efficiency Maine Trust, Maine Housing, and others. There's a goal in Maine, as I'm sure you know, of 100,000 new heat pumps to be installed in the state by 2025. So these are high efficiency electric air source heat pumps that have the ability to reduce emissions and be a more efficient heating source. Maine is heavily dependent on more than 60% of our homes use home heating oil to heat their homes, and so there's a big opportunity to reduce emissions from the heating sector. There are more than 50,000 heat pumps installed currently today. Actually, I think that number is larger than that and growing, thanks to a pretty big year of installing heat pumps through Efficiency Maine. And as folks I'm sure are aware, there are rebates currently available at Efficiency Maine for those. The same is true on electric vehicles, and I won't spend a ton of time on this, but really to set the stage that there are electric vehicle rebates and charging infrastructure grants available at Efficiency Maine Trust, and again seeing good uptick on all those programs. Next slide. Really, what I want to do is kind of say, as we kind of look to decarbonize the transportation and home heating sectors, both through lower carbon heating sources, things like biofuels or others. There's a particular focus on electrification, and as we seek to electrify, we need to make sure that our electric grid remains or becomes clean as well. And so this chart before you, just to orient you, is the percent of total electricity energy by resource type in ISO New England. So we share a regional grid with the other New England states, and that is managed by the regional by the RTO, or ISO New England. And I think what I want to point out here is that this is the mix over the last 20 years. So on the bottom left is the year 2000, and then to the right is going up to 2019. And what you can really see here is a real shift away from the gray and dark gray, coal and oil electric generation, down where it was, well over 30% in 2000. We're now down to less than 1% by 2020. So our regional electric grid is becoming cleaner. So since 2013, we've had over 7,000 megawatts of mostly older generation coal, oil, and others retire. Another 5,000 potentially to retire soon. So there's still capacity that is there for, when we're needed for peak times, but we're really seeing the electric system clean up. And if you go to the next slide, one of the ways, a lot of that is due to technology, the increase in natural gas, as you can see above, but states are also driving the investments in renewable energy. And one way that they're doing that is through the adoption of renewable portfolio standards. An RPS is a required amount of electricity that utilities are required to sell that come from renewable resources. So there are 29 states, DC, and 3 territories have renewable portfolio standards. They are each different, and they're done by state. And so state legislatures and policymakers are the ones that are kind of setting what falls within those standards. But you can see this is a common way by which states are driving the development of renewable energy. Next slide. And so here in Maine, we had an RPS of 40% prior to the legislation enacted and signed last year, which increased our RPS to 80% by 2030. So that chart to the bottom right is the comparison. It's small, but it's the comparison from ISO New England of new RPS requirements by state. So these are kind of new resources being added to the grid. Maine is that purple line. We used to be flat at 10%, but due to that legislation that was passed, we are now have one of the most ambitious in the country, but certainly the most ambitious renewable portfolio standard in New England. And where this ties to the clean energy economy is the legislation required the procurement of 14% of Maine's electric load for long-term contract. And so the idea being that those long-term contracts would lead to renewables being added to the grid. And the way that those were selected or reviewed was a 70% ratepayer benefit, but also a 30% economic benefit. And you may have seen the Public Utilities Commission announce the results of the first tranche of that procurement in the last 3 weeks. And the announcement from that was that they selected over 500 megawatts of new renewable resources. And again, there is a requirement for economic benefits to come with that. So with those new renewable energy resources come 450 plus full-time equivalent jobs during construction, initial capital spending of over 145 million, additional spending during the operations of the projects, and then an average tax payment of around 5 million annually. So these policies are driving new renewable energy development to help us meet our renewable goals, but they're also clearly providing economic benefits. Next slide. I think the same can be true for what we're seeing in solar and distributed generation. The RPS program is leading to more of your grid scale, your larger projects, but we're also seeing a number of smaller projects begin to take shape in Maine as thanks to legislation signed last year. So net metering, as I'm sure you know, was restored, and the project cap was increased to 5 megawatts. 2 new programs, one around commercial and institutional net energy billing, and another declining block program was initiated. The declining block program is currently was not as successful and is undergoing that we're going to see a report on that from the PUC soon. But right now there are under 100 megawatts of solar installed in Maine. That map on the left-hand side is the penetration of solar across the region. Blue being very low number of megawatts, with yellow being the highest. And so you can see that there really is a significant opportunity in Maine to catch up with our neighbors. Again, we have the lowest amount of solar, at least as of 2019, had the lowest amount of solar in New England. With that has actually been the lowest number of jobs in any state in New England. And, you know, as a result of these policies, we are now looking at, you know, over 1,000 megawatts in the queue in our utilities for potential pipeline of development. Not all those projects will get built. We need to make sure that we're, you know, keeping an eye on the cost of any of all of our programs and ensuring that, you know, they're sustainable so we can see sustainable growth and not kind of boom bust cycles in development. But I think it's important to note that there's a lot of opportunity. Maine has lagged in this area, and I think we're on the kind of precipice of seeing Maine be a leader as a result of policies passed last year. That chart in the middle is a projection by ISO New England of how much solar growth we're going to see over the next 10 years. That first bar you can see is actually the growth from January 2010 to where we are now. So we had 40 megawatts in 2010 as a region, and now they're 3,400 megawatts. And that is expected to double over the next 10 years. So clearly this is a trend happening across the region, and as a result of policies, Maine is going to be a part of that. Next slide. And then finally, you know, the state there are significant opportunities for offshore wind in the state of Maine. The map to your right is a map of wind speeds that are in ocean waters. You can see that Maine, red being the kind of highest, best wind speed, you can see Maine has some of the most best potential for offshore wind along the east and west coast. And so the governor announced in 2018 the Maine Offshore Wind Initiative to look for opportunities to responsibly advance offshore wind. We're participating in a federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management task force to identify opportunities. And just recently, the governor's energy office received over $2 million to begin implementing an offshore wind roadmap. And I bring this up because I think up and down the East Coast, we're seeing significant opportunities for development. There are more than 30 gigawatts of commitments for offshore wind, whether that's contracts or others. And with that come really significant economic opportunity, whether it's you know, the installation, the ports, manufacturing supply chain. And we want to make sure that as the region and the state considers this, that we've got a roadmap for how we best position ourselves from an economic perspective to do that. Again, we want to make sure that that's coordinated and with the existing, you know, offshore, the ocean users, but we really see that as an opportunity. And so you know, that is a very high level. I think we've, you know, not talked about weatherization here, have not talked about opportunities for lower carbon fuels, but a number of energy storage. There are a number of different categories. But in the short time, I just at least wanted to set the stage for kind of activities that are happening so we could see how they fit into the clean energy economy and what comes next. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa.
Great, thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. So as we just heard, following a series of actions taken by Governor Mills and with bipartisan support from the legislature, the clean energy sector is poised for robust growth in Maine. New renewable energy projects are being built, energy efficiency investments are reducing costs for consumers, and innovation from forest products to offshore energy is advancing in both the private sector and the university labs. So these and other efforts are providing real opportunity for our state's economy. Next slide. I'm going to walk through some jobs data. So prior to COVID-19, national job numbers indicated nearly 3.4 million Americans worked in clean energy occupations. And for reference, that's more than the number of people working in real estate, banking, or agriculture in the US, and 3 times the number of existing fossil fuel jobs. Leading that employment nationally and in Maine is energy efficiency, and that's followed by renewable energy, clean vehicles, grid and storage, and fuels. The chart on the right, between 2015 and 2019, the clean energy sector was adding jobs at a rate 70% faster than other economic sectors, really demonstrating the potential for clean energy to be a strong economic driver. Next slide. important to recognize that the job numbers that we're looking at are primarily from 2019, which is clearly before the COVID-19 pandemic. Analysis is ongoing of the impact of COVID-19 to the overall economy and of the clean energy sector. And this chart on the left is showing cumulative state clean energy job losses since the beginning of the year as of September. There are still under 500,000 clean energy workers out of work nationally, which is about a 14% decrease compared to the start of the year. However, a recent report came out and notes that Maine and much of the nation did experience job loss through May, but the trend from June to September is showing slight job recovery. There is precedent for the clean energy sector to respond well following economic turmoil with targeted actions and support. And the sector's momentum prior to COVID-19 underscores that the clean energy sector is poised for economic growth and recovery. Next slide. So this figure is showing Maine's energy employment for 2018 and 2019, and you can see that there was growth in every subsector between those 2 years. The next slide. But for the purposes of this report, we'll focusing really on those first 4 subsectors and not including the overall motor vehicle sector. So prior to the pandemic in Maine, nearly 18,000 people were employed in the overall energy sector. And of these, about 14,000 fall within the clean energy sector. And that includes transmission and distribution and storage, energy efficiency, low carbon fuels like biomass, as well as renewable energy generation. Next slide. So diving a bit deeper and looking at the electric power generation sector in Maine, wind has the highest employment with nearly 1,300 jobs, and that's followed by solar with about 800. In comparison, natural gas, coal, oil, and other fossil fuel electric power generation represents only about 300 jobs combined. Next slide. So in the same way, looking a bit deeper into the broad category of fuels, the majority of these jobs, over 1,800, are within oil and other petroleum, and that's followed by woody biomass and then other fuels. Next slide. So this map is showing clean energy as a share of statewide employment as of the end of 2019. The darker blue colors indicate a higher percentage of clean energy workers as a percent of overall employment in the state. On a per capita basis of statewide total employment, the Northeast claimed the top 5 spots, with Vermont, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maryland, and Delaware employing the largest share of clean energy jobs per capita in the country. So the success of nearby comparable states in building a clean energy economy is additional support for the potential of Maine's clean energy sector growth. And given that new renewable energy and energy efficiency policies and programs, as we just heard about, are still being implemented or at early stages, a significant positive workforce and economic impact from these policies is possible and anticipated, especially with targeted supporting efforts. Next slide. The clean energy workforce overall is really comprised of a broad spectrum of occupations. Compensation for these positions exceeded average national wages and are more comparatively financially equitable. About half of the clean energy economy workers attain no more than a high school diploma, but are able to earn higher wages than those with similar education levels working in other industries. In 2019, Maine companies projected about a 7% increase in electric power generation jobs in 2020 and about 400 new energy efficiency jobs, and that was based on a national survey, again, recognizing that was in 2019. In an effort to better understand Maine energy companies' expectations and challenges, the Energy Office and GoPIF distributed a survey, and I'm going to go into some of those results now. But I wanted to just note first that this was not a scientific survey. It's not a statistically valid sample. Rather, this survey was a self-selected sample of entities that were willing to participate and is really meant to be illustrative of the energy sector and provide insight into kind of qualitative overarching themes. Next slide. So you can see here we had about 118 responses, with the highest percentage of respondents representing companies and organizations within the renewable energy subsector. And that's followed by energy efficiency, professional services, and then other. And that other category was primarily nonprofits and educational institutions within the energy supply chain. There were also a handful of responses from fuels, transmission, distribution, and storage, and transportation alternative fuels. On the bottom, you see a summary of the responses to the question, do you expect that Maine's efforts to transition to a clean energy economy will have positive, negative, or no workforce and economic impacts within your company? And you can see here that over 80% of respondents indicated that they expect to experience positive workforce and economic impacts as a result of Maine efforts to support clean energy policy. About 14% indicated no expected impact, and 6% indicated a negative expected impact. Next slide. So 71% of respondents anticipated being able to meet their future workforce needs, but it's important to note here that many of these companies indicated that while they did expect to meet workforce needs, it was anticipated that that would be with challenges, including needing to attract enough workers from out of state, ensuring workers that were in the state had adequate training, building up certain trades, many mentions of electricians. So while there are expectations to meet these needs, there will need to be targeted efforts to ensure there's adequate workforce in the state. And the next slide leads into that a bit more, showing responses here to the question, if you do anticipate to experience workforce challenges, what do you see as being your biggest obstacle and over the next 1 to 5 years? And you can see that the most prominent reason given as an expected challenge was a lack of workforce with necessary skills within the state, but there were a number of other challenges that were noted as well. Next slide. So Maine's clean energy economy overall includes really a broad range of sectors that fall within energy efficiency, clean energy, that will generate economic benefits, support job development, and protect the environment, including the supporting supply chain for each of those entities. Maine's clean energy sector has long been seen as having high growth potential. A report as far back as 2014 evaluated Maine's technology-related drivers and identified clean energy as particularly well positioned for growth within Maine and for Maine to become a regional leader in the sector. Next slide. I'm going to go over this briefly. I think we've talked about a lot of this through our previous slides, but there are numerous benefits and co-benefits that come as a result of strengthening Maine's clean energy economy, including economic and workforce benefits through in-state, regional, and even global markets, building Maine's supply chain, ensuring community benefits, and public health improvements. Next slide. And with this, I'm going to pass it back to Dan to get into some of our draft strategies for strengthening the clean energy economy.
Thank you, Melissa. So as a part of the energy working group, we had a subgroup that was focused on the clean energy economy. We met a few times and put together some draft strategies. These were in the executive summary at a high level that was sent to the Climate Council, I believe last month. I had a 2-pager with that in there. And then as was mentioned, these have been put in the materials that Climate Council would have received in preparation for tomorrow's meeting. So I'm going to go through these at a very high level, knowing that there's going to be more to follow when the final report is released. So if we go to the next slide, the categories that these fall within, we have 4 different categories. The first is policy and program support. And I think at a very high level, it's about continuing the policies that have allowed clean energy to grow here in Maine. So continuing to look at those policies, ensuring that there's a development schedule or that the industry sees kind of longer term development, and then continue that focus on job creation, like we talked about with the RPS procurements, ensuring that economic benefits are a component of what's being considered. We want to monitor programs. They're not stagnant. They're going to need to be adjusted as needed, and then look for ways to expand incentives and grants as we go forward. So I think the first bucket is really about continuing modifying, adjusting, improving policy that's led to a lot of this growth. Next slide. The second, more focused on a lot of what Melissa went through, and I think is a big, larger part of the effort here is around workforce development and recruitment. And I think we heard loud and clear through the survey, through meetings, and through conversations that there's opportunities to support STEM education, CTE work at the community colleges, and provide pathways for Maine youth to fill these opportunities and to ensure that we're thinking holistically about how these jobs can be met. And I think much of this is in concert with the 10-year economic plan that DECD has put together. Falls again in the second bullet there, encouraging training opportunities and participation, and the third being working with industry to have them provide training or associated apprenticeship programs and opportunities in coordination with the programs and needs. And I think a lot of this is being done. I think it's about boosting that, ensuring that there's coordination there where possible, and taking that holistic view towards that. Next slide. Staying in the workforce development and recruitment, really about identifying gaps, programs, incentives to create those opportunities and making sure that is there. Second bullet, folks felt like there was a real opportunity to attract both companies and workers to locate or relocate to Maine. Continuing to do marketing or market research to find opportunities for Maine companies to relocate here. I think we're all clearly seeing folks move to Maine potentially more than they have been, as spurred by the pandemic. And so I think with that comes an opportunity to continue to attract talent here. The third bullet is around launching a workforce initiative, something that can kind of encompass a lot of this work, led by the Governor's Energy Office, but really a kind of public-private partnership that seeks to coordinate this through kind of an ongoing stakeholder work between industry, education, training organizations, and really looking at what are the current and future workforce needs. And then we've seen in other states the creation of an online portal that can act as a one-stop shop for those that are seeking to enter the industry. That way that, that job search process can be streamlined. There's also the possibility to have training and educational opportunities there, kind of that coordinated work in this one-stop shop portal. Next slide. The third bucket or policy bucket that we've discussed is increasing investment in clean tech innovation. Maine has a history of entrepreneurial efforts and programs, and we think a focus on clean tech to ensure that we're not just researching, but we're developing and commercializing products that can help us meet both our energy goals and our economic goals. I think we want to make sure that investment dollars are going towards those types of products, and that we're offering that support. And I think with that comes, I just want to say there clearly are a lot of areas where this is happening. A number of different entities that are doing this work, whether it's the University of Maine or MTI or a whole host of others, which I think are important to recognize. That there really is an opportunity to, I think, do more of that and continue that work in a coordinated way, whether it's through, existing incubator programs, through a number of different avenues. And I think with that, importantly, as is called out in the economic development plan and others, is to really continue the investment in broadband. A lot of these technologies are, and the workforce are going to be reliant on access to high-speed internet, and to make sure that is not an impediment to growth, particularly in the innovation sector. Next slide. The last bucket is really around equity and just transition. So ensuring that, as we're looking at the clean energy, not just programs, but the workforce, ensuring that we're taking that equitable approach. On the programs, we want to make sure that we're decreasing overall energy burdens and are focused on equity within those programs. I think we want to ensure that the policies that we're supporting are ensuring a fair distribution of benefits within the state and across the state, across those communities, and then again identifying programs that will ensure that we're creating programs that will assist companies to transition in a way that is equitable and just. And I think that can be a thread through a number of these, particularly the workforce component of that as well. Next slide. And so that is the kind of high level overview of the report. I want to really just highlight Melissa's work and doing a ton of work and research to pull this together. I want to thank the folks that have provided us feedback, folks that filled out the survey. As Hannah mentioned, look forward to having this report be published and have it be available to folks. And I think Hannah, happy to take questions or feedback or comments.
Great. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Melissa. And just again, we will be, for those who have just joined us, this report is anticipated by the end of the week. I think we've done a lot of heavy lifting and are adding sort of the specific, I think what the Climate Council is looking for in the coming weeks on all of our work are, what are we going to achieve? What are the outcomes? Sort of how does this plan get operationalized? And I think as many of you know from the draft plan of the Climate Council that's just come out, there's a pretty lengthy funding section about how do we pay for this work. So hopefully you all take a look at that before tomorrow's meeting. We will spend a little time thinking about both outcomes and how do we make this action possible. So I want to leave some time for questions, but I also think it's helpful to hear from a couple Climate Council members who are kind of deep in these trenches. I want to just quickly start with Michael Stoddard, because I think we saw that the energy efficiency sector is among the largest and fastest growing nationally. And I think we're seeing some exciting stuff happen in Maine. So I'm just going to give him a minute or two to just respond to this and sort of emphasize the areas that he thinks are most important for the Climate Council to be thinking about.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, we've been really encouraged this summer and fall to see very strong activity in energy efficiency, notwithstanding the interruptions of the pandemic. So we had kind of held our breath and feared the worst. And there was definitely a slowdown in March, April, but pretty quickly after that, activity rebounded. And so we saw really steady activity in all of the electrical efficiency programs, lighting programs through the summer and fall. That may be slowing down a little bit, but it's been more than made up for by a tremendous amount of activity with heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. And those are installed by HVAC technicians and plumbers and electricians. So those folks have been flat out busy. And if anyone's tried to do a project at home, you probably have discovered that there's a waiting list to, you're going to be 30 or 60 days out before you get help. The weatherization has slowed down for kind of obvious reasons. I think it's a little bit more invasive to think about having people spending that amount of time inside your home or business. And so that has slowed a bit, but I think it'll bounce back. But in all those cases, the exact kinds of jobs that Dan was talking about are needed, and they, with the exception of the weatherization, we know that these folks are adding employees and adding crews, and particularly anything to do with electrification, which everyone who's on the Maine Climate Council knows is a really major focus in the building sector and in the transportation sector. All of that stuff comes with equipment that needs certain set of skills to be safely and properly installed. And so there are good jobs there. Our community colleges and the MEMA, the Maine Energy Marketers Association, all have training programs that are really solid, and we try to push people to those. We've found that the small businesses that do this work are quite adept at bringing new recruits in and getting them into those programs. And they are pretty good judges of what the market will bear and how much demand there is for more services. And one of the other things that I think Dan mentioned at the outset, or maybe it was Melissa, that's really critical is predictability and a very steady market demand. So you don't want programs that ramp up and ramp down, ramp up and ramp down with a big budget one year and then no budget the next year. And we've been very fortunate with the paradigm for funding. Efficiency Maine is quite steady and predictable. So it enables us year after year to have a steady level of demand that those small businesses can figure out how best to serve. And so it seems to be going okay right now, but I do think all those areas of electrification, which involves heat pump water heaters and heat pump space heaters, is going to continue to grow. We've added 90 new vendors have registered in the last 4 months. So that's a little bit of a status report.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I'm just going to turn to two other folks, and then I would encourage people to put questions in the chat, or we'll call on folks. Matt Marks, who is a member of the Maine Climate Council, sort of as a leader among the, he is the executive director of the Associated General Contractors. Matt, you can correct your title if I just said it wrong, but doing a ton of work in the construction trades as it relates to clean energy. And I think it's just interesting to hear his perspective on the challenges this year, but also the potential for growth.
Thanks, Hannah. First, I just want to say great work to Melissa and Dan. It was nice to see that report. I like the jobs component of it. And, you know, it's funny, we've been in the clean energy business for a long time. Members who worked building bridges and roads saw an opportunity years ago to start in the clean energy business. And now that's, of course, expanded to solar as well. So it's exciting to watch companies change, modify, and also new companies that develop out of new sources of work. So I can tell you that a lot of the firms that invested originally, as we started to see recession, the last recession happened 2009, 2010, we're still building wind energy facilities, and that work was really important to keeping sort of a stable workforce sort of through that recession. As we did lose quite a few jobs, it was one of the few sectors that had growth, which was really critical, I think, to keeping the industry moving and keeping people excited about construction work at the time. We lost a little over a quarter of the workforce during that time period, which was really tough. The associated work between the transmission delivery work that brought the energy to the marketplace and the clean energy work that was happening then continued throughout until we started to see solar, of course, become a big growth market. Now, the folks who had invested in the equipment and the skills needed to build, wind turbines, then we're able to apply those skills. I think, as Melissa said, some of the regional stuff that could happen expanded pretty quick. Maine companies became known for that work, and they started to apply those skills, not just on a tri-state area, but also up and down the East Coast and some as far west as Colorado. So it was pretty exciting to see that kind of innovation happen. There were also some other projects that you may have noticed that, looked at bringing some of the technology in that would replicate some clean energy work that wasn't typically just wind, but using ocean energy and other things that were pretty exciting during that time period. In Maine, companies and developers won some national awards for. I thought that was pretty exciting during that time period. So now we're in a new era. We're looking at a new clean energy economy. I think a couple things that I would take away from the report today, and also looking at where we are. We're finding that as we reach out to students, that the clean energy work is obviously exciting to them. It's a good point of recruiting new young folks into the industry. And we've been able to rebuild probably about 10,000 workers over the last few years, which is exciting, but we know we're going to need a lot more as people start to retire and the new opportunities that exist. I think Michael hit on it. There's a lot of work to be done. So as we start to look at that, we've started to reach out to schools about possible opportunities to have, particularly like electrical workers who may never thought of that career before, but might be more excited for the fact that they can look at the clean energy piece of it, which I think is pretty exciting because those skills will transfer over if there was a shift in the economy in the future. So we saw some of the same stuff that I think Michael said. You know, we had some of the clean energy work related to homes, you know, maybe put on pause for a little bit during COVID, but on the commercial side, those were still going pretty strong. We're seeing that market continues to grow. I'm also noticing that companies are starting to shift again. I'm starting to see some of those firms that traditionally had not done solar work are now starting to explore that. I'm also seeing some other companies who had done work here in Maine, but maybe not had some permanent roots here, starting to explore whether or not they want to make Maine a home for their business. And I think that's pretty exciting too. So I would say that overall, this report was well done. And I think that's what's exciting is that we can start to build sort of that future workforce and hopefully excite young people to look at construction in a different way. We've known it a lot different for a long time, but to hear that younger people are thinking that this is something they want to be engaged with, I think is a positive outcome of this. I would also say that, you know, when we look at sort of the stuff like the roadmap, the offshore roadmap, all that kind of planning, and I think Michael hit on it from his predictability point about what their funding is, all those kinds of things we can do to make sure that the equipment and the people are in the pipeline is sort of critical for how we plan moving forward, because it is a substantial investment, whether it is new cranes, technology, or training. So I'll leave with that. I'm happy to hear this report today. I think it's good news.
Thank you, Matt. And last, I'm just going to go to Pat Strauch, just on the forest products side. I think, you know, whether it's offshore wind, you know, what the University of Maine's doing with innovation there's been a lot of discussion about wood products. I think this report sort of doesn't hit on the construction trades in terms of like new building materials, but certainly biofuels and the construction materials are still going to be part of our how do we build good jobs. It's just not as much on the energy side. So Pat, love to hear your thoughts. And again, if you have questions, we've got about the last 10 minutes after Pat speaks for questions.
Well, thank you, Hannah and Dan and Melissa. This was a good report. And I think I'm still a clean energy guy. I'm never sure sometimes, but we traditionally have been very involved with biomass energy because we have residuals generated by our paper mills and our sawmills, and then we have in-woods harvesting. So at times we've harvested between the two 15 million tons of wood and put them through those kinds of energy systems. And I think we continue to have a residual mill challenge. If you're going to make square rectangular pieces out of round wood, you're going to have extra pieces of wood laying around between sawdust, bark, and chips. So we have declining use of markets for bioenergy, but still a growing residuals challenge. So we are looking at the traditional kind of CHP plants that can now be downsized and scaled to small sawmills so that we're matching energy production with the right sized kind of facility. We still have the standalone biomass plants, which just recently Re-Energy bid successfully on a project, so their costs are coming down and being more competitive. But we are also looking at the next wave of opportunity for these residuals that we generate. And we're seeing sawmills that are contemplating putting in very efficient combined heat and power facilities that will also be able to generate biofuels through some extraction technologies. And we in Maine, Bates College is already using a pyrolysis oil. They have been for several years to heat their facility. And that oil is made in Quebec next to a sawmill up in that country. And there's no reason why we can't begin to build these kinds of interesting biofuels in Maine. But we need to have the offtake agreements and develop the market to begin to put those facilities in place. Of quite a bit of interest in this field. Techniques are being refined. We're working a lot with Finland right now and taking a look at some of the companies that are up in that region, developing these technologies, actually commercializing them and using them. And we think there's a match in Maine to kind of address our wood low value market needs, as well as the opportunities for contributing to new and interesting kinds of industries. When you begin to extract the kinds of things out of wood to make biofuels, you also develop the opportunity to extract sugars, and that gets you into the ability to make biodegradable plastics as well. And you can hear the university has got a project going with Nestle's and Poland Spring Water to take a look at some of those options. So this is the kind of thing that we're developing as well, to have a homegrown kind of energy solution to create Maine and our R&D facilities up at the University of Maine to be the hub of some of that technology that supports innovation and more capital investment. So you'll see more of that kind of opportunity coming in the next year here as we develop those leads.
Great, thank you, Pat. Lydia, I see you got your hand up, so I'll let you go first.
Thanks. I'll be brief. I just really wanted to say I really like the detail of the workforce development recruitment aspect of that plan. I think that it looks like you've put a lot of thought into it, and it seems like it has a lot of good potential there. And also, is the plan going to include incentives for low income? Is it going to get into the details of incentives for low income spurring of electric vehicles or energy efficiency? Are we going to be expanding on that through the energy program that we're going to see later this week? And finally, the offshore wind roadmap, the ports and infrastructure aspect of that, I think is really important. And I think it's really important to talk about ports and infrastructure in terms of everything else that we're dealing with waterfront work, working waterfronts. So I wanted to just see how much detail and when we're going to get that kind of detail. So those are my two questions.
Sure, thank you, Representative. So really quickly, so received the offshore wind roadmap funding a few weeks ago, and so the plans are coming together for what that process will look like. I think it's worth mentioning that when the governor returned from her trip to Scotland on the offshore wind mission, she announced a study of Searsport, the Mac Point specific study of that area to look at ports and infrastructure opportunities there. That is slated to be completed by the end of the year, so we'll be outside of this Climate Council process, as will the roadmap, but ongoing kind of work to keep an eye out for there. On specific details related to kind of low-income funding and what will be in the report versus what could be in the Climate Council report, I think there'll be some specific and mentions the Efficiency Maine team, the team at Maine Housing. They're all running programs that are focused on low and moderate income individuals. I think there'll be mention of that, and I think, you know, as a Climate Council, we can probably talk about if there want to be more specifics around expanding that in the Climate Council report.
Great. And I just would say that the equity report was sort of super helpful on how do you incentivize consumers, or how do we help them participate in these programs? And I think we're trying to make sure that that's included in the report. I think that work is ongoing even over the next couple of weeks. But I think that's an important area of discussion. Sandy.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Dan and Melissa, for a great report. I just want to build on a couple of things that Pat Strauch said about the forest products industry. A couple of more markets that are out there. It would be lovely to have a cross-laminated timber plant in the great state of Maine. We seem to have the timber, and it's a lot less carbon intensive to build buildings out of wood, if we can pull that one off. And also, I've been interested in what is happening up in Madison with the Geo Lab happening with wood fiber insulation. both rigid and particulate, I guess. And these are opportunities for entrepreneurs and private industry, and I hope that Maine latches onto that. I also would like to encourage more specific language around the potential that tidal energy has. Right in this state, we've got Ocean Renewable Power Company that, and we've got 5,000 miles of coastline. So we've got tides, we've got machinery that can do the trick and help create clean, renewable energy right from the tides that we have throughout Maine. So I just wanted to maybe highlight the potential for private investment in renewable energy, in addition to other recommendations we've got for state. One more thing, so important, this K through 12 curriculum that talks about climate change, but also talks about where the opportunities are technically in the state would be outstanding if we can pull that together. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. Helpful. Dan, you want to say anything on that? On the
I was
tidal
just
power?
going to say the same thing. I think you're right. ORPC is doing a lot, and I think that fits within both the kind of policy bucket, but also the innovation bucket. The work they're doing is exciting. So I appreciate that comment.
Other questions, comments from Climate Council members in our final minute or two? Such a well-behaved group this morning, gearing up for tomorrow. All right, well, anybody else? Going, gone? Can give you an extra minute of your day back. I will just say that to the Climate Council members, we are meeting tomorrow morning starting at 9 a.m. We have sent you another long draft. It's also posted publicly on our website. We don't expect you to read every word. We've tried to put things in red that are new. I definitely would encourage you to read those red sections to sort of look at the overview. This is again draft. These are not things you've agreed to, but they are sort of growing based on your comments, other inputs we're receiving. This report in particular, sort of the draft that we've gotten to date. Also a specific and lengthy funding discussion, which I think is sort of something that a lot of folks have anxiety. How are we going to encourage or support the legislature and governor in attempting to do these things? So please take the time to at least skim through that before tomorrow morning if you have time. So otherwise, we're going to give you some presentations, but a lot of tomorrow is about digging into some discussion. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the resiliency and adaptation side. We're going to talk about metrics and goals, and we're going to talk briefly again about this report and specifics. So we look forward to seeing you all at 10. Thank you, Ben, for the comment. Again, if you have questions or comments before this plan finally comes out by the end of the week, feel free to contact me or Dan or Melissa. We're listening, and your comments this morning have also been helpful. So with that, thank you, everyone. See you again tomorrow morning.